This is IAT355 Lecture 11.2, part of the Temporal Visualization series, and now we're going to be talking about intervals. Previously, we've been talking about timelines, where there are events occurring on a timeline, not uncommonly linked together by a continuous line. Now what we're going to be doing is talking overtly about timeline techniques that have intervals of time or periods of time directly depicted in the visualization and things that you can do with them as a basis of analysis. So one of the standard styles of doing visualization of time intervals is the Gantt chart. And you're all familiar with the Gantt chart. There's a timeline running horizontally on a linear axis, typically, because Gantt charts are used for planning of projects and such like. What I'm going to show you now is an example where there are also quantitative values that are being depicted in parallel, and I'll show you a little application. So here's a Gantt charting application, and you can see this is from DVT, and you can see that here are a set of tasks. The individual people here are associated with doing those tasks in this column, the tasks listed here, and the time period of those tasks, as well as linkage that this task depends on the completion of this one, and so on and so forth. Down below, we have another visualization and an accounting of which department is going to do some work. And the horizontal bars account for intervals of time that the department or the individual is going to work on a task. Down below, we have bars being used in a different way. What's being used here is the quantity of time that an individual is spending, say, per day throughout the week on individual tasks of what type. And so here we see task 36, the purple ones here, is occupying David Schmidt's time. So what we're showing in this example is, the classic Gantt chart technique with a few more elements of visual language there that help the user or the planner figure out how quickly a task can be completed and how to divide tasks such that, all the people on the team or all the departments in the organization, can be kept busy getting stuff done and not sit there waiting for other people to complete their tasks. And so it's good for resource management and resource organization. So basically, here's another view of the thing. This is a little bit more generic, and we're showing the sequence of tasks that need to be done. On the left, you would imagine that there's a set of a list of people or organizations or entities that are doing the tasks, along with the milestones that are, task to be completed here, and a description of what that thing is intended to look like. So taking the Gantt chart concept as an inspiration, at the University of Maryland, Catherine Plaisant and her colleagues built this system called Lifelines, which has been extended and revisited over the years to enable not only analysis of individual timelines or individual suites of events on a timeline, but also to indicate, to create modes of analysis, which we'll talk about in a later lecture series. Anyway, what Lifeline started off as is a way of depicting personal histories. In particular, if you have a suite of personal events, say, that were documented individually, without a tool like this, it will be hard to understand the totality of the suite of events that happened in a person's life. So what Lifelines does is present an overview of the events. And example domains that they explored in the project is medical history, which we'll show second, educational background, the sequence of educational events that a person had, and the first example will show criminal history for the famous Bart Simpson here in a second, and the tasks that you're interested in doing with a system like Lifelines is to put together the complete story of what happened in a person's life, to gather information about decision-making or to enable decision-making, to notice trends that are going on in the data in which the individual events themselves and the documentation of events might not enable a person to understand that, and to help the user gain an overview of the events to grasp, as it were, the big picture of an individual's life. So here is a screenshot of Lifelines. And this is Bart Simpson's criminal history, and as we can see that the set of events that are depicted here are categorized into separate categories. In this case, cases, placements, that is to say the person is part of the criminal justice system, assignments, who is working with Bart Simpson, and reviews, who has reviewed the case or the suite of cases to do with Bart Simpson and what ought to be done. In this case, in this situation, Bart is a young offender, or as the name might infer, a young troublemaker of some description, and he's been up to no good, and here are the sequence of events in his timeline. He did a break and enter, and it was handled informally. I did another break and enter that was handled informally. Then he stole a car that was handled more formally. He went to court, etc., and he was found to be a juvenile delinquent and spent some time at some institution. Here's his placement, something to do with drug abuse, and the location where he spent time to address that. So the advantage of this is you can see not just the fact that this stuff happened with Bart, but also the interaction of the other people, social workers, lawyers, police, whatever, who interacted with Bart, who dealt with Bart's case or Bart's situation at various levels. And the contribution of the Lifelines project isn't the fact that there is a timeline, it's the creation of an organizational schema that you can use to take the sequence of events, categorize them, organize them, and see how they line up in time, and also see how events, say down here in a review, influenced events up above in some other way. Perhaps a little bit less challenging set of circumstances is shown here. This is Linda Simpson, a relative of Bart, perhaps, who this is Lifelines used for medical histories. And once again, you can see categories of the medical history of Linda Simpson here. We have immunizations, other events, medications, tests, medical tests that have been taken, hospitalizations, and notes. So this person's a tobacco user, they had Lyme disease, arthritis, and obesity. Being a person who's over at the age of 40, obesity might be an issue. And these are the events and the occurrences that have happened throughout the medical history. Now, this is obviously concocted data where there's a lot of medical events going on for a 40-year-old person, but it's not unheard of for a person to have a number of medical issues to deal with, but this one happens to be put together in a way where there's a lot of stuff going on. And in this thing, there's not only the ability to view what happened over time, but also, of course, to drill down on it. So here is I forgot what exactly triggered this, but this is an ultrasound of a pregnancy, and some selection has occurred in the timeline to select. I want the viewer, the user of the Lifeline system wants to interact with the system to see the medical image, and that is the time and date and location where that medical image was taken is also located in the timeline. So here's pregnancy right here. Presumably that got clicked on in order to show the imagery related to the pregnancy. So obviously different colors are used for different event types, and line thickness can be used to correspond to another variable. It's not really used much in the medical or the criminal history, but it's a possibility. And of course, the interaction is that clicking on an event produces more details. So this embodies the Schneiderman mantra. You know, Schneiderman's at Maryland, so it's not a surprise that overview first. Take an opportunity to zoom and get details on demand. So of course the timeline is stretchable or shrinkable if you want to concentrate on a particular time period. The benefits of this thing is that it reduces the chances of missing information, and what the point that's being made there is that's in contrast to a sequence of reports. The presentation of that stuff on the timeline enables a more rapid search by presenting it in a common visual layout along the timeline. And it can also facilitate the spotting of trends or anomalies. You know, you would expect, for example, a pregnancy, if things are going well, to have it, a standard sequence of events that go along, ultrasounds periodically, the Lamaze classes, all sorts of good stuff. And, if those are not happening, then somebody examining the lifeline history of a pregnant woman would be interesting. Where's that ultrasound data, because there's supposed to be one and it's not present. So maybe there's a drawback with record keeping or a miscommunication. It also streamlines access to details and maintains a simple, remains simple and tailorable to various applications. One of the challenges with it, however, is in essence, as you add more and more events, or perhaps more and more categories that are actually filled with something, you end up creating a display that can be very large, and eventually you run out of pixels. So zooming techniques and other sort of dismissal or expanding, shrinking operations have to be in place in order to be able to access things and summarize those things appropriately. The original Lifelines thing was really intended to be a timeline for an individual person, and for more analysis where you're analyzing a group of people or a number of people who are doing something similar. That kind of analysis would be interesting to look at, but it's not really enabled by the Lifeline system at the time. So here's another visualization of intervals. In this case, instead of the time scale being days, weeks, months, years, here the time scale is seconds. So this is an event log viewer, the kind of thing that you would see being produced in a log file, say from a web server or something like that. And what's again going on is a sequence of events have been recorded, and the timeline is visualizing those events. Here, the events, of course, are occurring in a much different time scale. And what's really of interest here is how separate processes or threads are communicating with each other. So in a network visualization, you really would like to be able to see how one part of the process or one process communicates to another process, communicates to a third process. When you're trying to figure out how, why it is that, say, your server isn't serving enough clients, even though it should be. It will be good to understand the communication pattern to see what's holding things up and what's getting in the way. Or if there's something anomalous going on, you'd like to be able to see that. And visualizations like this help you analyze things in that regard. This is another timeline. In this case, what's going on is that the interval concept is being used to depict inventory currently and in the future. So here in this bicycle inventory application, you're using a timeline to depict how much inventory is present at a particular location. And according to past events, there's during the weekend, bicycle inventory falls down to a low number, and then bicycle inventory increases. And so what they're doing is, examining those trends and getting an indication that with the bookings that are happening in the future, they'll run out of inventory here. And you can see that in sort of going to the negative space here during February, March, and April. And, viewing things that way is a way to, what it's doing is depicting a quantitative value on the timeline for the purposes of aiding planning. That kind of information is also the kind of information I use. I don't depict it on a timeline, but it's information I use when I examine the amount of courses that we have to offer at CIAT every year and when to offer them. Because, each of you as students, need courses to graduate. You need to have enough and not be turned away from courses because they're full. And analysis of this kind of supply and demand is something that is central to, the director and associate director's job. This is another variation of timeline. In this case, what's being shown is quantity of, is healthiness. This is a personal timeline of an individual who has myasthenia gravis, which is an autoimmune disease. And autoimmune disease does bad things to you. Your immune system attacks part of your body, and one of the approaches to deal with that is to take a steroid. And one of the things that a steroid does is that steroids do generally is they suppress the immune system a bit. But the drawback with that is that a suppressed immune system makes you more vulnerable to infection. And so that's some of what this timeline is depicting, is that here in the sort of pinky orange color here, the annotation says stomach went bad, morning issues, fine rest of the day, worse when eating carbs. And it's a documentation of the severity of that problem and the interventions that this person did to be able to address that. And so basically, I'm imagining that what happened is that the prednisone that he or she was taking suppressed the immune system that allowed a stomach infection of some kind to take hold and to disrupt the patient's health. So finally, I'd like to show an interactive timeline. Once again, this is a coordinated view with the timelines of U.S. presidents' lifetimes, starting from the point when the guy started as president, and also depicting how long they lived after their presidency. So let's just go see that right now. So here's the application of living United States presidents, and it starts from the onset of the presidency as an office in 1789. And here we see George Washington was alive and then stayed living a little bit beyond his presidency in 1800 or so, 1799. And then we see Adams, Jefferson, Madison, and so on. And you can see that there are some periods when quite a few presidents are still alive after having, after leaving office. And back in the day, before 1900, the number of presidents still alive at the time was fairly small. However, in the modern era, particularly since about 1980 or so, there have been quite a few presidents who are alive after their presidencies are complete. I think that's just basically reflecting our trend of greater longevity amongst all people, and it's also manifesting in the lifetimes of U.S. presidents. And so, anyway, the thing that's kind of fun and interesting about this is you get to see the number of people who were alive. And so, an early peak was in 1824 or so, 1825. Then one in 1860, and those peaks were once again matched in 1990, 2000. And we'll probably see a decline in that with Trump and Biden both being somewhat old for, record-setting old folks. So anyway, that will possibly change over time. But it's an interesting visualization, and the thing that's kind of cool about it is as you scroll around interactively, you get to see the display update, and this is a recognition of the thing that you're really focusing on as a primary topic of interest as you move around in the scene. So um, the moving of the cursor on the timeline updates the evolving timeline and time period. And so the spatial allocation period here is that each president gets his own row, and the time interval is, of course, the time from the start of the presidency until the end of his life. Okay, so let's go back to the other thing. Okay, so here we are back at the slides. So that wraps us up for an investigation of the use of timelines. Timelines are often used for planning as well as understanding phenomena of interest. But as you can see in the presidential one here, there is often this challenge to be able to manage space appropriately if the horizontal dimension and the vertical dimension has a lot of items in it. This timelines, essentially the primary geometric allocation schema for intervals is that each kind of event or category of event gets its own chunk of vertical space. And so each of the horizontal stripes arrayed vertically from top to bottom needs to be allocated, and at some point you run out of space. In the presidential thing, the way in which space is managed is as you move the timeline, there's an automatic scrolling of each of the individual presidents. In lifelines, there's this management by opening or hiding individual categories. And so approaches that manage the organization of the suite of intervals are vital to this, because the concept is that intervals take up a significant amount of space, both horizontally and vertically. Horizontally, so it can depict the interval, and vertically, so you can actually read what it is and understand what it is. So there's always this a space premium that's required, and I think that primarily that's due to the most common use of timelines with intervals being things like the Gantt chart, which are suitable for planning. Okay, so that wraps us up for lecture 1.2, temporal visualization, where we've been speaking about intervals.